So what do you do now? Your child's already in grade school and you just want to help them learn more efficiently. But the critical period of brain development has long passed. First of all, don't panic. One of the most amazing things about the brain is its ability to change and adapt and grow and reorganize itself. We just have to give it the opportunity to do so. And we can do that at any time in our lives. Remember Tala's handwriting sample? She was a teenager when we began our work together, and due to the degenerative nature of her condition, doctors said she could probably never improve on her motor skills. With 100 billion brain cells tucked away in the dark chamber of the human skull, creating at least 100 trillion connections with information from each person's individual environment and experience, how is it possible that two brains exist that are exactly alike? It's not. It's also not possible to study each brain and find the best way for that brain to develop and learn. In an effort to try to identify the best way to teach a child, there have been many approaches in education and psychology to try to identify learning styles. Multiple intelligences, the VAC, Visual Auditory Kinesthetic, or VARK, Visual Auditory Reading Writing Kinesthetic model, or even personality traits that give us information about the best way for a student to learn and navigate the world. While I do find merit and much interest in many of these approaches, none have been more valuable to me in my life and my work than the award-winning author and biologist and educator Carla Hannaford's work with dominance profiles. Ideally, once the left and right hemispheres have gone through their developmental stages, the corpus callosum has mastered its task of integrating the two sides, and we have a well-balanced, whole brain approach to learning. There is, however, a tendency for us as individuals to favor one side or the other. We're more comfortable either in our left brain, logical, sequential, organized, or in our right brain, creative, intuitive, messy. As I mentioned, I've been practicing this work for many years, starting from when my firstborn, Ricardo, was about a year old. With the information that I had, I allowed my children to develop as naturally as I could. I didn't push them to walk or talk or read or write before they were ready. I just offered them an environment that would make their brains happy. Ricardo is most definitely a left brain dominant learner, through and through. And Matteo, who is 2 years younger, started off much more right brain dominant. I used to joke that between them I have a whole brain child. I observed Matteo over the years desperate for his older brother's respect. Ricardo was always heavily into science and anything factual, and wasn't that interested in anything artsy or emotional. I don't say creative here because creativity is a whole brain thing, and everyone is creative. You should have heard of the inventions that Ricardo came up with. Matteo was much more into history and the stories that would spark his imagination. He loved to collect figurines and spread them all out into the village he made on his bed. But to gain Ricardo's respect, he would almost force himself to remember facts, historical facts, scientific facts, random facts, allowing him to engage with his brother in his way. Matteo was exercising his left brain skills and helping his corpus callosum grow and integrate those two sides. I noticed this early on and talked to the boys about it. I always encourage the boys to be involved in their own learning process. Ricardo, with his left brain logic, decided that he would take on an activity that would exercise his right brain muscles to give him more balance. He took up drums, the artsiest thing he would agree to, and he did really well, and the teacher wanted him to join the band, but he didn't enjoy it at all. It was just a relevant, strategic activity for him to stimulate his right brain. So he gave it a year and packed it in, which was fine because he did see the benefit of tapping into that right brain, and he continued to seek right brain activities that were acceptable to him. Throughout his exams in college, he developed a love of gourmet cooking, and now that is his balance. He studies economics and finance at uni, no surprise there, but knows that when he's overwhelmed and just needs to relax, he plans a meal for his girlfriend and creates a delicious masterpiece, tapping into his right brain and finding balance. Matteo found his passion in the performing arts and has become a very successful music student, particularly talented in composition, which is a highly integrated subject choice. Ironically, it was when Matteo stopped trying to impress Ricardo and follow his own passion that Ricardo found enormous respect for his brother. I'm telling you this story because the information I'm sharing with you here, the activities that I suggest, and the approach to learning that I promote isn't just a thing you do to help your child succeed in school. By observing your children and yourself with brain specs on, you're getting to know each other on a deeper level. Self-awareness and awareness of who your child is fundamentally is the highest achievement of all. And academics and success in life somehow fall into place from there, no matter what their grades are. So how do you tell what your brain dominance is? I don't buy into those online tests that tell you to look at which way the dancer is spinning. There is no simple test for brain dominance. It's really about understanding the functions of each side and observing your child and yourself. You wouldn't want to try to identify dominance until at least the age of 7, giving plenty of time for the brain to settle into its preferred side. Having said that, as a parent, you do begin to see clear patterns forming earlier on. Ricardo, at a very early age, always wanted to understand the rules of the game before he tried to play. Matteo just threw himself in. Ricardo kept his room immaculately tidy and still does, and Matteo was, and still is, somewhat messy and disorganized. Another way to figure it out is that you can have a little conversation with your child to look for clues. Ask them to tell you something about a familiar story. Goldilocks and the Three Bears, for example. A left brain dominant thinker would tell you what happens in sequential order. She tasted the porridge. The first was too hot, the second was too cold, and the third was just right, for example. A more right brain dominant thinker would give you random facts and perhaps even an emotional spin on the story. She fell asleep in the baby bear's bed, and the bears were so angry at her that she ran away really scared. When I asked Ricardo to tell me something about Goldilocks, he said she should go to jail for breaking and entering. He's all about the rules. In my own very simple experiments, I found that showing someone this image of the left brain, right brain model and asking them which side they prefer usually brings on an opinion that matches brain dominance. Matteo and I love the right side of this image. Ricardo loves the left. Obviously, this is not a scientific way to tell brain dominance, and of course, we all use both sides of our brain, and one side is most definitely not better than the other. We need both. This information simply gives us clues as to how we are wired. But it doesn't end with brain dominance. Remember, the brain only processes information for learning. It doesn't gather the information. How we gather the information can give us clues as to possible challenges we face in learning. Generally speaking, the left side of the brain operates and processes information from the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain operates and processes information from the left side of the body. This is an extremely simplified version of brain function to help us as parents and teachers help our children develop and learn more efficiently. It is not by any stretch of the imagination that simple. The brain is a fascinating and unbelievably complex organ, and scientists are learning new things about it every day. Here we can see the mapping of different functions showing up all over the brain. But if we keep it as simple as possible, we can even get the children involved in their own learning process. And maybe they'll go on to study neuroscience. According to Dr. Hannaford, ideally and most efficiently, the brain gathers information from one side and processes it on the other. So a left brain dominant learner who is right-eyed is probably very efficient in processing visual information. A right brain dominant person who is right-eared, perhaps they would struggle when it comes to verbal instructions. And so it goes for eyes, ears, hands, gross and fine motor, and feet. A fascinating aspect of this dominance theory is that under stress, and all learning is stressful, the non-dominant hemisphere all but shuts down. Obviously, it doesn't shut down completely, but its functions are significantly reduced. This information has been so valuable to me in my life, not only in my coaching of parents, teachers, and children, but also in my self-awareness and the awareness of those who I am in a relationship with. In fact, this little nugget of information changed the nature of my relationship with my eldest son, Ricardo, just as he was entering his preteens. As you know by now, Ricardo is left brain dominant, so under stress, Ricardo's right brain, that's his emotional, feeling, intuitive side, all but shuts down. I'm right brain dominant, so under stress, my left brain, that's my logical, articulate, analytical side, all but shuts down. So when Ricardo and I used to get into an argument, he would be able to remember everything. He'd recall things I had said and the times and the dates that I'd said them, but he didn't care much for how his words were upsetting or hurting my feelings. I, on the other hand, felt every bit of emotion as my son was throwing these words at me like a laser. I could barely string two words together. It wasn't because he was stronger or wiser or I was weak and intimidated. It was merely because the stressful situation limited each of our non-dominant sides and communication was almost impossible. When I learned this information from Carla Hannaford's book, The Dominance Factor, I talked to Ricardo and we agreed that whenever we needed to deal with a stressful situation together, we would both take time out to cool off before we engaged in conversation. That way, we weren't entering into communication under stress and with only half a brain each. And it worked. He's almost 20 now, and while we do, of course, get upset with each other at times, we know exactly what to do to ensure that it doesn't escalate into anything more than a discussion. It is enormously helpful for us to know where our information is coming from and how efficiently it is being processed. So we look at the eye, ear, hand, both fine and gross motor, and foot. Ricardo, who is left brain dominant, is right-eyed, right-eared, right-handed, both fine and gross motor, and right-footed. All his information is coming in through the right side of his body and immediately and efficiently gets processed on the left. Even under stress, his ability to learn and retain information is hardly affected. That's why he's so unfazed by exams. In Carla's book, The Dominance Factor, this is profile A and is the dominance profile that our entire school system is built for. I am right brain dominant and also right-eyed, right-eared, right-handed, both fine and gross motor, and right-footed. All my information is coming in through the right and is processed on the right, not as efficiently. So I need a little more time to process information. Under stress, and learning is stressful, my ability to process information is drastically reduced. This is profile L and is probably the most challenging dominance profile to fit into our school system, as I found out. Matteo has the same dominance profile as me, right brain, right eye, right ear, right hand, both fine and gross, and right foot. But because I had this information very early on in Matteo's development, and we were consciously building that corpus callosum, he is pretty well balanced. And even though he is the same learning profile as me, he has learned neurologically to cope much better under stress. Carla Hannaford found that most children who were on the gifted and talented register were more often profile A, and children that were identified for special education needs were more often profile L. That's because our school system is set up for certain profiles and not because one profile is better than the other. We are just wired differently, and we can learn enormous amounts from each other. As a side note, and it's very nice to know that Albert Einstein is presumed to have been profile L, everything on the right. I just had to get that in. Another example from my own experience is my overwhelming stress when it comes to exams. I completely fall apart. During my GCSEs, I got so sick I couldn't sit the exams, and to this day, and I'm almost 50, I will only take a course if it doesn't end in a formal exam. I'm perfectly fine to write a paper or do practical work for assessment, but exams, I can't do it because the stress dramatically limits my access to the left hemisphere, which is the side that allows us to articulate our knowledge in exams. To identify dominance in the ear, eye, hands, and feet, we just need to observe our children in daily life. For eye dominance, give your child a camera, an old-fashioned one that you have to look through a hole. Which eye does he or she naturally use? Or ask them to look through a kaleidoscope or a peephole in a door. For ear dominance, ask your child to put their ear up to a door and see if they can hear who's on the other side. Or ask them to put their head on the table and listen for a knock while you gently knock on the table. While we may prefer to use our dominant ear to hear on the telephone, our hand is also involved there, so that's not a very good indicator. For fine motor hand dominance, you can see which hand a child naturally uses to write or color or use a spoon or a toothbrush. And for gross motor hand dominance, it's easiest to tell when they are throwing a ball. Toss the ball back and forth and observe. For foot dominance, which foot is used to kick a ball? Or which foot goes on a flight of stairs first? Or which foot do they put their shoe or sock on first? Try to observe over a little time and see which ear, eye, hand, and foot your child seems to be leading with most often. and always allow them to use what is most natural. Don't force or encourage a particular dominance. There are 32 learning profiles in Carla Hannaford's book. So if you're interested in knowing more about your specific profile or that of your child, please consider purchasing the book, The Dominance Factor by Carla Hannaford, PhD. I wish I could put a copy in every single school library. Otherwise, you can identify learning profiles yourself and consider that information that comes through the opposite side to your dominant hemisphere is more likely very efficient, and the information that comes into the same side as your dominant hemisphere is likely challenged or less efficient.